So the final portion of this session really focuses on the literature review itself. So you've begun doing the research. We worked through Standard 10 to start, and then Standards 1, 2, and 3 as the drivers of school improvement. So you're going to be using the research that you do, the journal articles that you're reading, to develop a literature review, which is then going to lead you into the 90-day entry plan that you're going to be developing based around 5 specific PECL standards. So just a reminder, the literature review itself is worth 100 points, another 10 points for the research citations. You must have a minimum of 3 peer-reviewed articles per standard. It's written in APA format. You'll do a quick introduction for each standard and a conclusion for each standard, as well as an overall introduction and conclusion for the literature review itself. We are here in session 2. That's the work that I'm providing you. So in about 2 weeks' time, so February 15th, you want to have the basic construction of your literature review done. Bring it with you. We're going to review it in class. But make sure that it covers PECL Standards 10 and 1 through 3 that we covered briefly today. So, a literature review is really a survey of research. It's used to formulate a response to a research question to take action on. But really, it's looking at what the relevant research in the field is given on a given topic. It's not a bibliography. It's not just a summary of everything that you find. It's really a synthesis of the information that you're collecting in the research. And it's a place where you're not going to be stating opinions. You're not going to be determining, what is valid or invalid. But really, you're going to take a state of what the research of the field is saying. So again, a literature review summarizes the research that's available on a particular topic. It synthesizes those findings. So again, it's not a first this journal article said this, and then this journal article said this, and then this journal article said this, and in conclusion, ... But you're looking at the major themes. And for your work around the PECL standards, you're really considering the theme of the standard as much as you are the theme of the research that you're surveying. Again, you're going to conduct one. In this case, it's really going to be to develop a 90-day entry plan that is research-based. So it's making those intentional research-based moves as an educational leader in a building in support of student learning and school improvement. And then we write literature reviews for a couple of different reasons, but it's really to determine what the research says and how the research that's available is going to impact my work and my decisions. I shared with you on the first session that a very wise administrator that I had the opportunity to work with really said to me that principals and buildings are paid for their judgments. And if you think about it, everything we do is a judgment, it's a decision. We are the air traffic controllers of the building. And so using research as the basis and using a standardized approach to the PECLs is really what's going to be helping us to make sure that we are making decisions that are in the best interest of children. So the 3-step process for literature review really involves doing the actual research, so reading, going out and finding, understanding what you're looking for, which is why we've spent some of this time looking at the themes of each of the PECL standards, really determining and appraising the work that you're reading. You're going to do some research, but you may not include some of that research in your literature review or your entry plan because it may not be relevant. Or you might read a journal article that you pull one small element from as a part of your research. So you're appraising it. You're not summarizing each journal article, but you're really pulling the information from them and synthesizing across the journal articles that you're reading. And then obviously, in order to do a literature review, you have to write. So that's I'll pause here to recommend that we don't wait until February 14th on Valentine's Day to start that draft for class on the 15th. We really want to make sure that you have it ready to go and that you're working at it along the way. It is one of the reasons that we parceled the PECL standards, so that we're kind of walking through them, logic cluster by logic cluster. And so when you think about the structure of a literature review, it's very simple. There's an introduction that you're providing that kind of gives an overview of the topic, and for you all, it's the PECL standards. The body really is going to be, for you all, organized thematically, and so we'll talk about what the different structures themselves are. But you'll outline each PECL standard, and then under each PECL standard, you'll introduce the themes of the standard, what the research says, and then you'll develop a conclusion for each of the standards. And you'll have a final conclusion for the literature review itself after having reviewed all 10 of the PECL standards. So when you open up with an introduction, you're really going to talk about the purpose of the literature review. And for you all, this very much is that 90-day plan. You're developing an understanding of the research that's available to you. And then you're really going to talk about the PECL standards themselves. Feel free to talk about the history with the ISLIC standards. Feel free to talk about the major themes, the work that's been elevated, the things that you've been finding through your review of the PECL standards. Your body is really going to be organized in a thematic way. So the themes of your work are going to be the PECL standards themselves. And so feel free to have a section for each of them that then synthesizes the research that you found for each of the PECL standards. You're going to go through PECL standard by PECL standard. And then in the conclusion, you're really going to summarize what you've written and what its implications are for that entry plan that you're going to be doing. So when we talk about the different types of literature reviews, there's three major organizational structures. First off, there's a chronological, which is essentially looking at the relevant research as it came out through a historical timeline. There's a thematic approach, which is, again, what you'll be doing. It's a central topic or issue, which for you would be the PECL standards. And then it talks about the different pieces that go into that. And then there's a methodological organization. So this is not appropriate for the PECL standard review, but it's more looking at the methodology of the research that's being done or the particular approach to something that was taken. This would be a mismatch to do that. And so what we're going to do is we're going to analyze a sample literature review that's a thematic structure. In the module itself, it's a sample literature review. It's this engaging readers, research-based practices that nurture the motivation to read, written by Mount St. Mary's very own Barbara Marinac. And you'll notice that each of the components that we just discussed is evident in the work that she produces. So it's a really, it's a perfect example of a literature review here. Dr. Marinac started with a research question, looking at what are the research-based best practices that nurture the motivation to read. You'll notice that this is kind of the abstract, but it also could be evidence of an introduction. She notes the purpose of the article, which you must contain in your introduction, because you want the reader to better understand why you're writing that literature review. And then she provides some specific steps along the way. This could very much be something that you discuss around the purposes of the PECL standards as they relate to your work as an educational leader. This is where you could begin to talk about what the PECL standards are, so on and so forth. As you look at her document, you'll notice what I've highlighted in pink is what the introduction really is. So there's a clear structure to it where there's an introduction to the work itself. It does include some of the baseline research, and so when you do your introduction, you are going to want to talk about some of the research that's general to the PECL standards. It may not be to a specific standard, but it's in general to the fact that the PECL standards exist, what they are, historically where they came from, so on and so forth. She used a thematic structure for hers as well. She had three major topics: foundations of reading motivation, motivating reading instruction, and then motivating contexts. You're going to have each of the 10 PECL standards as your thematic structure. And you'll notice if you look at the article itself, she doesn't go research article by research article by research article. She combines or synthesizes the work and the major themes so that the reader better understands what the scope of the research across the field really is saying. And then finally, she ends with a conclusion. There's a couple of parts to her conclusion. She talks about implications for practice. You're really going to be focusing on implications for your leadership, and we call that kind of the so what. But she also moves into this now what. So she has recommended next steps. You can foreshadow to some degree where you're leaning in terms of the 5 PECL standards that you think you're going to elevate in your work. We'll talk about this in a future session, but really you want to start to think about how am I connecting the literature review to the 90-day entry plan that I'm going to be developing. And then finally, she closes. There's an overall statement about the work that was surveyed, the research that was done, so that there's an idea of what has been learned overall, but also in a very succinct manner. So that's kind of it for the literature review. This is just a reminder that due for the next class are going to be these journal article submissions for standards 1, 2, and 3. So you'll notice underlined says begin working on your literature review. For you, this might be spending a lot of time doing the research. For you, it might mean actually getting pen to paper or starting to tap away at the keyboard to build that structure out. One of the things I recommend is think through the structure. Since it's a thematic structure, you already know what the focus is going to be. You know what your 10 themes are going to be. So go ahead and start building those out, and as you do the research, maybe start bulleting information with citations from where you're pulling it from. and then using that information to synthesize across. So again, just to note that the next session, as well as the ones to follow, are going to be at the Frederick campus. So we'll be meeting in person, so make sure that you are ready to go. We'll spend some time reviewing the literature review itself, answering any questions in preparation for the class on the 15th, where you're actually going to bring a draft with you. So have a good rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever it might be, and I will see you on February the 8th.